Before we start working on our ethogram assignments, it's first important to think carefully about why it's important to observe animals. And first of all, watching their behavior is a really great way to understand their basic biological needs, like their habitat requirements, dietary requirements. We may have a specific mission, like a captive breeding program, so we need to know something about their reproductive requirements. Also, if we put animals together, we need to know something about their social systems, their social organization, potential aggression among individuals, and ultimately how compatible they're going to be with each other. There are some quite well-known cases of zoo animals being put together when they were not compatible, which ended in the tragic death of one or more of the animals. So it's very important to understand the social structure of our species, and also what their sort of stimulation needs are. Being bored, being in a sterile environment, a non-enriched environment, has very negative effects for a lot of animals. So we can understand whether we're being successful with our enrichment programs if we carefully watch the animals and look for signs of engagement with what we're stimulating with, and look for signs of unhealthy behavior. So another reason is to detect signs of distress and disease. Again, in our pets, our zoo animals, we may need to watch what they do to figure out if they're healthy or not. They might reduce their activity levels. They may eat a different amount than they normally do, or change their behavior in other ways. On a basic science level, we may be interested in a given species to better understand their behavior just for the sake of knowing, or maybe to better protect them in their natural environment. We also might have a particular interest in a certain behavior across the board, no matter which species exhibits it. Maybe we're just interested generally in understanding parental care behavior in animals. So we might observe a variety of different animals, learn about their parental care behaviors individually, and then use that to form hypotheses, theories about how animals take care of their offspring and why. So the first thing you have to do is to pick your animal, and again, in some cases, you may have a predefined objective, like you're running a captive breeding program again, so you have to know what their reproductive needs are, maybe minimize their stress to facilitate reproduction, find compatible mates, etc. You may ultimately be interested in learning more about animals in the wild, or testing some basic scientific hypothesis regarding ecology or evolution. That may be your ultimate goal. For you, your mission is to pick a species that's suitable for the ethogram assignment. So one that's accessible, one in which you can observe multiple individuals, at least 3. Maybe they need to be accessible at different times of the day. You want to pick a species that shows enough variety of behavior to complete the assignment, but isn't so subtle and complex that you become overwhelmed. So then the next step is to find out what's already known. So if you do a project on Canada geese or horses, domestic dogs, there's already an abundant literature. So you can use that to form a basis for your observations, and also compare what you saw with what others have found, and use the previous literature to interpret what you saw. Okay, so when you go out to take notes, or when you sit down with your animal cam, a few things you'll need to take notes, because you'll need to submit your notes with your ethogram report. You can either type them in or write them freehand on a piece of paper. You'll also maybe need a camera or video capability to take video, a timer. A camera or video equipment will not be necessary with an animal cam, but a timing device will be, some kind of watch or the timer on your cell phone, so that you can record durations of behavior. So you can boil this down pretty much to have your phone handy these days, except maybe bring a raincoat if you observe outside and it's rainy. So you'll need to keep track of some information so that you can report it in your methods section. So each time you sit down to observe, whether it's outside, at a zoo, in your front of your computer, watching a webcam, you'll need to record the date, the times when you started and stopped your observations, the weather conditions, and sometimes that's available for animal cams. You'll need to maybe find that out from the website or from the local weather in the place where the animal cam is. Obviously, if the animal's indoors, just report that the animal's enclosure was indoors and the animals were kept at room temperature, standard room temperature. And location, describe it a little bit. The physical location, you'll need to include that in your methods section. So if it's a zoo enclosure, what was in the enclosure, how big it was, etc. If it was outside, was it a dog park, the dimensions of the dog park, trees, objects in the dog park, etc. And then if you know something about the animals, describe the animals in your notes, how many you watched at a time, the species obviously. If you know the sexes, ages, write that down so that you can report that in your methods section. And it's good before you do your ethogram observations to practice a little bit. Again, you can use an animal cam for your ethogram assignment, but try it first and see how it's going to work, how you're going to keep track of their behaviors and take notes before you actually start spending your time on the assignment. Or you could practice on a pet. So you might even consider, if you take notes on paper, to just make a header like this so you don't forget anything. Because again, you're going to need this information for the methods section of your final report. So you have to keep track of all this. And there are different ways to sample behavior. One is called ad libitum sampling. It's just free-form note-taking. There are no particular rules. You just write down anything you see as you see it. It's a good idea to spend an hour doing this just to get an overall feel for what the animals are doing. You can also then focus on particular animals one at a time, or if you're interested in, let's say, refining your operational definition of how they move, let's say how a squirrel runs or hops, just look for instances of that behavior and take further notes. That's called behavior sampling. And you can also scan groups of animals. This might be good if you observe something like flamingos at the zoo. You might need to do that when you're first developing a list of behaviors that you're going to refine your observations on. And also you might use it when you're constructing your time budget. And then by time, there are a couple of ways to record, either continuous recording, where you write down the time when they change behavior, or instantaneous recording, write down what they're doing at predetermined intervals, like every minute, write down what the animal is doing. So you can use these in different combinations with each other, like you can do focal animal instantaneous recording. Follow one animal at a time and write down what it's doing every minute. That's a good way to estimate its time budget. So you are going to be doing an ethogram again. So you'll need to identify 10 different behaviors, give them a name that is descriptive, and then develop a physically descriptive operational definition for each. And that includes being as quantitative as you can, how long the behavior lasts, the particular angle at which it holds its different body parts, things like that. So here are a couple of videos to help you practice. Here's a squirrel eating a nut. Just press play, and in this case we're going to skip to about 40 seconds. There's a little bit of kind of distracting stuff at the beginning, and focus in on what it's doing when it's actually eating this nut. You know, how's it holding its body exactly, its tail? What is it doing with its forelimbs? How is it chewing into the husk of the nut? You want to be physically descriptive when you write up your definitions. Okay, and then, whoops. And then in this video, here's a squirrel running across a lawn, but what would you say about how it's moving? Do you see more than one type of locomotion there? Is it just running straight across, or does it stop periodically? Why is it stopping? How is it holding its body? What's its footfall pattern? Does it spring off with its hind legs and make contact with its two front legs? Is there a difference between the way it moves in one instance and the way it moves in another instance? Like, could you record actually two different types of locomotion here? Hopping, like that, and crawling, like that at the end, when it's crawling on all fours. Okay, then your next step is to develop a time budget, and again, you're going to use a combination of different focal animal or group sampling, and then a recording method. It just depends on what works best for your animal. You have some flexibility there. So, few things to think about. You need to be as accurate as you can. Try not to get distracted by things happening around you. If you are only able to observe your animals in the morning, just make sure you specify that your observations only apply to morning and that their behavior may be different at other times of the day. And then in general, especially in captive animals, we may not be sure if we're seeing normal behavior because maybe in a captive environment they're not motivated as they normally would be, and maybe they didn't develop right, and so their behavior isn't reflective of what we would see in wild animals. And stress can also affect animals' behavior. One category of behavior we see in captive animals is called stereotypical behavior. That's repetitive, stress-related behavior, like this bear swaying back and forth. Sometimes it's pacing, chewing. This indicates an animal that is not in good condition. This animal swaying back and forth, it clearly needs more stimulation. It's maybe bored, it's stressed. These are the signs we look for in animals who are not in good shape. So those are some reasons why we need to watch animals to better take care of them and to complete, other scientific and practical objectives.